המפקדים הבכירים אני מכיר אישית, אתכם אני מכיר מבחינת הרוח, כי יש פה פגש, ומי שרואה עכשיו את עזה מרחוק יראה אותה מבפנים. אני מבטיח לכם. בהצלחה. טנקיסטים, הארטילריה, ההנדסה, חיל האוויר, המודיעין, חיל הים, כולם איתכם. כל מה שצריך.
Meanwhile, the US President Joe Biden on Thursday asked Americans to spend billions of dollars to help Israel fight Hamas as America flew sophisticated weapon systems to Israel, including 2 Iron Dome missile defense systems, and ordered its largest aircraft carrier to move closer to Israel. The US has also set up a small cell of special operation forces. It is working with Israel to provide intelligence and planning as well as advice on hostage recovery efforts. The Pentagon has also ordered additional warplanes to bolster the A-10, F-15 and F-16 squadrons at the West Asian bases. The U.S. Defense Secretary recently ordered about 2,000 U.S. forces to be prepared to deploy if needed. On the other side, Hamas and other Palestinian groups in Gaza Strip have a variety of homemade or smuggled rockets at their disposal to use against Israel. A bigger threat is being posed by Hezbollah's Iranian-supplied arsenal of rockets, drones and missiles. Hezbollah can rain fire on targets throughout Israel, including with far more advanced and hard-hitting weaponry than what Hamas has been able to muster. And as per the War Zone portal, the sheer scale of Hezbollah's rocket armory is hard to conceptualize. In 2016, estimates put the arsenal at around 150,000 rockets and tenfold increase over the roughly 15,000 that was said to be available ahead of the 2006 Lebanon war. The number has since grown even larger. Hezbollah says it possesses short-range ballistic missiles, drones and anti-ship missiles. Given Hezbollah's very latest, our correspondent Jody Cohen has sent us this ground report from Israel. Listen in.
It's been 2 weeks since the 7th of October surprise attack by Hamas. A lot has happened in that time. Firstly, thousands of Hamas terrorists crossed the border into Israel and killed 1,400 people. Over 250 were shot at a music peace festival for young people in the desert. Hundreds of others were killed in cold blood in the villages and kibbutzim in the Israeli communities bordering Gaza. It's thought that between 200 and 250 people were kidnapped and are being held by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, including the elderly, women, children and even babies. The Israel Defense Forces' focus since then has been to find the Hamas infiltrators, dozens of whom are still thought to be within Israel. The IDF say they're striking Hamas targets and preparing for a ground offensive. They have warned civilians in northern Gaza to head to the south, where a humanitarian zone is being set up and aid will be allowed in from Egypt, which also shares a border with Gaza. Israeli troops, as well as being on the border with Gaza, are also on the northern border with Lebanon, following numerous rockets and missiles from there. And Israeli civilians have been evacuated from the north and the south to the centre of the country for their safety. This is Jody Cohen for WION World is
2 weeks since the Israel-Hamas war broke out and no end game is in sight. As humans continue to suffer, till now, more than 1,400 Israelis have been killed and over 3,700 people have been killed on the Palestinian side. Question still remains over who attacked the hospital in Gaza that allegedly killed hundreds. Question also remains over whether Gazans will be able to receive the much-needed aid that they require. And it is yet to be seen how a possible Israeli ground offensive into Gaza will turn out. Now, in the latest, let me tell you, Israeli tanks are moving closer to border between Israel and Gaza. This after Israeli defense minister told troops that they would soon see the Palestinian enclave from the inside. This indicates that an expected ground invasion with the aim of annihilating Hamas could be nearing. But let me also mention here that Israel had initiated the ground offensive, or the plan for the ground offensive, several days ago with a 24-hour deadline, which they have been extending till now. Other latest updates in the war are coming in from a new front. Tensions are escalating on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, as I mentioned earlier. Israeli authorities have announced plans to evacuate the northern city of Kiryat Shmona after days of clashes with Lebanon-based Hezbollah group. Hezbollah is another militant faction and it is backed by Iran. Meanwhile, Israeli army has released a new footage of strikes targeting different groups, including Hamas in Gaza and Lebanon's Hezbollah. The targets include anti-tank missile launching posts, tunnel shafts, intelligence infrastructure, and command centers. Israel had earlier said that its forces had targeted Hezbollah infrastructure and struck 3 people who attempted to launch anti-tank missiles at Israel. International pressure is growing for the release of Hamas hostages. Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs, together with 22 ambassadors and diplomats from countries whose citizens have been abducted to the Gaza Strip, have called for the immediate release of the abductees. They also demand to allow visits by the Red Cross. The ambassadors and diplomats are from countries including Tanzania, Russia, Romania, Portugal, Peru, Serbia, Colombia, Austria, Ethiopia, Argentina, Philippines, Georgia, Sri Lanka, France, Mexico, Denmark, Hungary, Italy, Thailand, Canada, the Netherlands, Poland, and the European Union. It's a long list. Meanwhile, hundreds rallied in New York City for the release of Israeli hostages in Gaza. Take a look at these visuals.
The words that could not, and we will prevail. A few years ago, as the United States Senate...
While protests also continue in support for Palestine, dozens protested on Thursday outside the Israeli embassy in Santiago, Chile, in support of Palestinians in Gaza. Separately, bodies of 8 Thai victims killed in Israel have been brought back home via an Israeli commercial flight. Thai government officials held a ceremony marking the return of the slain citizens of Thailand, which was also attended by the Israeli ambassador there. According to Thailand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 30 Thailand citizens have been killed from Hamas attacks in Israel, which took place earlier in the month, while 16 were injured and 17 were abducted.
While Israel's relentless air raid across the Gaza Strip continues, tensions have been simmering at the Israel-Lebanon border for over a week now. Artillery exchange between Iran-backed Hezbollah and the IDF forces seeing an unprecedented escalation, unheard of since the Lebanon war back in 2006. Will the continuing barrage of airstrikes on Gaza open another war front with Lebanon? Our next report takes a closer look.
For those not familiar with the history of West Asian conflicts, what is happening on the Israel-Lebanon border may seem somewhat trivial as opposed to the atrocities being reported in Gaza. Over a dozen people have been killed by mostly IDF troops and Hezbollah fighters. The fighting, limited to a few kilometers for now, has been going on since last week. The location of the clash is key. The Al-Shab border in southern Lebanon is a largely mountainous terrain, making it a fertile ground for guerrilla fighters. Here, the Hezbollah. Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed armed group, is a regional force. It dominates southern Lebanon. The name translates to the Party of God. The Hezbollah was set up by Iran's Revolutionary Guards in 1982. The aim was to fight Israeli forces that had invaded Lebanon then. The group remains one of Israel's sworn enemies and sees it as the biggest threat to its borders. Israel sees the Hezbollah as the biggest threat at its borders. Hezbollah is the only faction from the Lebanese civil war that has been able to retain its weaponry. It was Hezbollah and its guerrilla fighters that aided Lebanese victory against Israel in 2006. There has been no major Israel-Hezbollah face-off since then, but the recent escalations have ignited fears and revived memories of a conflict between the two. Hezbollah till now has not hinted at their direct involvement. Regional observers say, given the current economic and political climate of Lebanon, their entry seems unlikely. But on the slight chance that it does happen, then West Asia might be staring at a more grim reality. There has been nothing concrete said yet. The Iranian foreign minister, however, did hint at the possibility of a wider battle.
If the United Nations and the political activists don't use these limited opportunities in the coming hours, the possibility of opening new fronts against the Zionist regime is inevitable.
The United States has warned Iran, which backs Hezbollah and Hamas, against getting involved in the crisis. Washington has also deployed 2 aircraft carriers, which it says aim to deter any state or non-state actor seeking to escalate the war. But Hezbollah official Hashim Safieddine has issued a warning. He asked leaders of the US, Israel and Europe to be careful. Israel, meanwhile, has threatened that if Hezbollah opens a new front, all of Lebanon will suffer the consequences. Israeli missiles can level Lebanon and destroy its infrastructure, kill people and worsen the already staggering financial crisis. Israel also cannot afford a war on another front. Unlike the Hamas or Palestinian Islamic jihadists, Hezbollah comprises a battle-hardened group. They have precise long-range missiles. Their ammunition kitty has increased multifold in recent years. All parties are aware of the dire consequences of what can happen if the war spills over. Despite that, there is always the chance of a miscalculation in an active war. Keeping this in mind, West Asian countries like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have advised their residents to avoid traveling to Lebanon for the time being and asked those in the country to leave as soon as possible.
Now, as Israel continues its assault in Gaza, tension is brewing on another front. And we're talking about the northern border. Israel shares a 130-kilometer border with Lebanon, and the situation has always been tensed in this region. Lebanon is home to one of the most powerful Islamist movements. The Hezbollah group has a powerful military wing, and it has extended full support to Hamas. For the past 13 days, this is what has been going on at the border. Amid the exchanges of firing, Israeli soldiers are on high alert, and Hezbollah has lost few of its fighters. At the moment, there is no evidence of direct involvement of Hezbollah and Hamas, and this is what we are asking tonight. What will happen if Hezbollah joins the war? The deputy chief of the group says that they are prepared for the war. But does Hezbollah share an alliance with Hamas? Relations between the two groups have not always been good, and there are fundamental differences. Hamas is an offshoot of the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood movement, while Hezbollah's strongholds are in Shia regions. But when you have a common enemy, differences often disappear, and in this case, the catalyst is the war. Both groups oppose any normalization of ties by Arab or Muslim states. Bringing these two groups closer is Iran. The country has a network of proxies in West Asia, and Hezbollah is the most able and strategic one in this network.
رهبران مقاومت به صراحت گفتند ما برای جنگ رویاروی با اشغالگران رژیم صهیونیستی آمادگی داریم.
Iran has called the assault in Gaza a genocide just 6 days after the war. Iran's foreign minister sat down with the head of Hezbollah. Tehran has been constantly warning Israel to stop its atrocities, but the attack on the Gaza City hospital seems to be the tipping point. Iran's foreign minister posted an ominous tweet after the attack, and he said that the time has come for the global unity of humanity against this fake regime, more hated than ISIS and its killing machine. Time is over. Now the question is, can Hezbollah afford a war with Israel? Not only known for its military capabilities, Hezbollah also runs a political party that wields decisive influence. It owns TV stations and an extensive network and schools and clinics. So its sprawling business interests brings in hundreds of millions of dollars, which means funding is not a problem. There have also been recent videos of fighters training. This means war on two fronts for Israel, and experts are warning that if the northern front opens, it could pose a bigger threat than Hamas in the south. The war will not limit to the borders.
the new war will definitely have a ripple effect in West Asia.
The latest updates in the war are coming in from a new front. Tensions are escalating on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. Israeli authorities have announced plans to evacuate the northern city of Kiryat Shmona after days of clashes with Lebanon-based Hezbollah group. Meanwhile, Israeli army has released new footage of strikes targeting different groups, including Hamas in Gaza and Lebanon's Hezbollah. The targets include anti-tank missile launching posts, tunnel shafts, intelligence infrastructure, and command centers. Israel had earlier said that its forces had targeted Hezbollah infrastructure and struck 3 people who attempted to launch anti-tank missiles at Israel. International pressure is growing for the release of Hamas hostages. Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs, together with 22 ambassadors and diplomats from countries whose citizens have been abducted to the Gaza Strip, have called for the immediate release of the abductees. They also demand to allow visits by the Red Cross. The ambassadors and diplomats are from countries including Tanzania, Russia, Romania, Portugal, Peru, Serbia, Colombia, Austria, Ethiopia, Argentina, Philippines, Georgia, Sri Lanka, France, Mexico, Denmark, Hungary, Italy, Thailand, Canada, the Netherlands, Poland, and the European Union. Meanwhile, hundreds rallied in New York City for the release of Israeli hostages in Gaza.
The words that could not, and we will prevail. A few years ago, as the United States Senate majority.
While protests also continue in support for Palestine, dozens protested on Thursday outside the Israeli embassy in Santiago, Chile, in support of Palestinians in Gaza. Separately, bodies of 8 Thai victims killed in Israel have been brought back home via an Israeli commercial flight. Thai government officials held a ceremony marking the return of the slain Thai citizens, which was also attended by the Israeli ambassador. According to Thailand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 30 Thai citizens have been killed from Hamas attacks in Israel, while 16 were injured and 17 abducted.
And joining me on the broadcast this minute is Nibal Farsak, spokesperson for the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, with me from Ramallah. Thanks very much for being here on the broadcast. First of all, what can you tell us about the situation on the ground at this point?
Thanks for having me. The situation in Gaza is just heartbreaking and overwhelming. It is horrible. It can't be described. Since the beginning of the escalation for the 14th day, everything in Gaza have been under intense bombardment, whether homes, residential buildings, roads, infrastructures, hospitals, places of worship, medical facilities, they are all under intense bombardment. Residential buildings have been razed to the ground. We have witnessed attacks against everything at the Palestine Red Crescent. We have lost until now 4 colleagues who were killed by Israeli bombardment against our ambulances. The situation is so much hard. We are facing great challenges conducting our humanitarian role in Gaza. Up to the moment, we have recorded at least 16 different violations against our medical missions, as Israeli are targeting Palestinian civilians as well as medical care personnel, medical facilities which should be respected according to the international humanitarian law.
I just also want to ask you about the preparations for the delivery of aid to the war-torn enclave. We earlier have been getting in those reports of the UN Secretary General also visiting the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing with Gaza to oversee preparations for the delivery of the aid. Tell us more about that.
For over a week, the Palestine Red Crescent has been preparing to the entry of the medical and humanitarian aid. Up to the moment, our committees are ready. We have set up committees at Rafah and Gaza, as well as our warehouses are fully prepared. We're just waiting to get the aid in, so we will be handling the receiving and the distribution process along with our international partners. We are in close coordination with our colleagues and our partners in the Egyptian Red Crescent. We will receive the aid from their side, and then after unloading the trucks from the Egyptian Red Crescent to other trucks, which is a lengthy process, we will be handling the distribution process according to the list that we have received from the Egyptian Red Crescent. It will be absolutely targeted towards the most needy areas in Gaza Strip, and the most in need now are hospitals, as hospitals are witnessing a state of collapse due to the shortage of medical supplies as well as medicine. Most hospitals are running out of fuel. Up to the moment, according to our information, the aid includes some basic humanitarian aid such as water and food, while as for the medical supplies, there is medical supplies and medicines. We have not been notified whether it will include a fuel, which is most probably not the case, although we have been alarming for a days that fuel is running out of hospitals, and hospitals now completely rely on backup generators to have electricity so they can continue providing their life savings services.
Right, we are leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for being here on the broadcast.
We're being joined by Mr. Volker Stanzel, who's a former German ambassador to China and Japan. He's joining us live from Berlin at this moment. The ambassador, we've witnessed this horrific conflict that is now dragged on for about a fortnight now. And there are at least about 200 people who are said to be in the custody of Hamas. At this moment, there are 22 ambassadors who have also said that it is important to try and get these hostages released. Do you think the state of Israel and also the United States and the international community has done enough to try and secure the release of the hostages who are presently in Hamas's custody?
Well, the state of Israel in the past, at one point, exchanged, I think it was 5,000 of its Palestinian prisoners against one hostage taken by the Hezbollah. So it seems the state of Israel, under the pressure of its public, obviously, and out of humanitarian concern, is ready to go a long way. But whose interest is it to keep the hostages or to allow them to go free? Obviously, Hamas has taken hostages with a purpose. That is to keep human shields, not only its own population, as it has done in the past and is doing presently, but also in the future. And the number of hostages goes to show that Hamas is really using this tool that it has discovered to the utmost it can get out of it. Now, what else can Israel do? It can, of course, start the ground war that you've been speaking about. But if it does so, the risk for the civilian population and the hostages as well is immense. So I think the ground war will not start all too soon, and not in a way that all humanitarian concerns are laid aside. So right. You see from my reply that I'm pretty helpless myself in finding a way how to get the hostages out.
Now, do you think at this point of time can any negotiations be held? Because at this point of time, what is happening is Israel, as a part of its strategy, has carried out its relentless campaign of air raids and air bombings on the Gaza Strip. The death toll continues to rise. Should there be negotiations to first get the Israeli hostages out and then continue with this operation?
Well, the Israeli hostages and the international hostages, of course. That is why you have so many ambassadors involved in this effort to commence negotiations with Hamas. But what price to pay to Hamas? Hamas would have to give up its human shields, and then it would be subject to even more relentless fights and aggressions by Israel.
Right.
And do you think Israel would forego the possibility to decapitate Hamas, as it has called its objective? I think the price that Hamas would have to ask for giving the hostages free is too high for the international community to pay.
All right. My last quick final question to you, Ambassador, because we're running out of time, is, there have been indications that this war could in fact spiral well beyond the boundaries of Gaza Strip. There has been a Houthi missile that has been intercepted by the Americans, and there is tension that is going up along Israel's border with Lebanon. What do you think, in your assessment, is the likelihood that this war could now spill beyond the borders of Gaza?
That would be in the interest of Hamas. It would not be in the interest of Hezbollah. And it would also, I think, not be in the interest of Iran, because it would involve the Americans, and that would make the war go to another level, which would be extremely risky for the parties involved. So I do not think there is a danger, of course, of the enlargement of the war, but I cannot see it come right around the corner.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador, for joining us and getting us those insights then.
After 13 days of the Israel-Hamas war that has left hundreds of people dead, the drumbeat of war has only grown louder. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rallied frontline troops near Gaza. Decked in body armor, he pledged that troops would fight like lions and win with full force. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant also toured the front line, telling some tens of thousands of troops awaiting the ground invasion that new orders would come soon.
המג"דים והמפקדים הבכירים אני מכיר אישית, אתכם אני מכיר מבחינת הרוח, כי יש פה פגש, ומי שרואה עכשיו את עזה מרחוק יראה אותה מבפנים. אני מבטיח לכם. בהצלחה. טנקיסטים, הארטילריה, ההנדסה, חיל האוויר, המודיעין, חיל הים, כולם איתכם. כל מה שצריך.
The US has been flying military support for Israel, including 2 Iron Dome missile defense systems it had previously purchased, after ordering its largest aircraft carrier to move closer to Israel. Washington deployed a second aircraft carrier. President Joe Biden is asking Americans to spend billions more dollars to help Israel fight Hamas. The US has set up a small cell of special operations forces. It is working with Israel to provide intelligence and planning, as well as advice on hostage recovery efforts. The Pentagon has also ordered additional warplanes to bolster A-10, F-15 and F-16 squadrons at West Asian bases. The U.S. Defense Secretary recently ordered about 2,000 U.S. forces to be prepared to deploy if needed. Officials say the Biden administration has already given Israel small-diameter bombs and other munitions, and more will come. On the other side, Hamas and other Palestinian groups in the Gaza Strip have a variety of homemade or smuggled rockets at their disposal to use against Israel. A bigger threat is being posed by Hezbollah's Iranian-supplied arsenal of rockets, drones and missiles. Hezbollah can rain fire on targets throughout Israel, including with far more advanced and hard-hitting weaponry than what Hamas has been able to muster. As per the War Zone portal, the sheer scale of Hezbollah's rocket armory is hard to conceptualize. In 2016, estimates put its arsenal at around 150,000 rockets, a tenfold increase over the roughly 15,000 that were said to be available ahead of the 2006 Lebanon war. That number has since grown even larger. Hezbollah also possesses short-range ballistic missiles, drones and anti-ship missiles. Given Hezbollah's arsenal, Israel is staring at a potential two-front war and would need to tackle rocket barrages in such a scenario.
After carrying out relentless airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has told his men to get ready for a ground offensive. The same was echoed by Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he met the soldiers, calling on them to fight till victory is secured. Israel has massed tens of thousands of troops along the border with Gaza following the October 7th cross-border massacre by Hamas militants. Meeting Israel's infantry soldiers on the Gaza border, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant urged the troops to be organized and ready to enter the Gaza Strip. He, however, did not mention when the invasion would begin. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also met with combat soldiers at the Gaza border, and he reaffirmed the troops that the entire state of Israel stands behind them and vowed to emerge victorious after the war.
אני פה עם הלוחמים של גולני, הם באים מכל חלקי הארץ, הם לחמו כמו אריות, הם ילחמו כמו אריות. אתם מוכנים להמשך? כן! אנחנו הולכים לנצח בכל העוצמה, אתם מוכנים? כן! כל עם ישראל עומד מאחוריכם, ואנחנו ניתן את המכה הקשה לאויבים שלנו כדי שנשיג ניצחון, לניצחון. מוכנים? כן!
Meanwhile, as Israel continues to pound Gaza, new satellite images show a number of people taking shelter in schools and hospitals around Gaza City. US President says militant group Hamas and Russia are both out to annihilate democracies. In an impassioned speech to the nation from the Oval Office, Joe Biden, seeking re-election in 2024, is preparing to push Congress for a massive $100 billion package that includes funding for Israel and Ukraine. Presidents traditionally reserve speeches from the solemn setting of the Oval Office for moments of key national significance. Fresh from a whirlwind trip to Israel, the 80-year-old Democrat is going all out to win over war-weary voters and hardline Republicans. Biden stated that the stakes are too great for Washington to abandon Ukraine and Israel, and added that the U.S. remains a global guardian for freedom. He said, and I quote, "America is a beacon to the world still."
In the Middle East, Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to completely annihilate a neighboring democracy, completely annihilate it. Hamas' stated purpose for existing is the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses Palestinian civilians as human shields, and innocent Palestinian families are suffering greatly because of them.
Washington is backing Israel in its war with Hamas, even as the Russia-Ukraine war shows no signs of an endgame. Tying together two conflicts an ocean away from the U.S. is a bid by Biden to frame them as part of a bigger struggle to shape the world order and protect Americans at home. Biden had earlier mentioned a global inflection point that's bigger than party or politics. Hard-right Republicans and a growing number of voters are strongly opposed to adding to the nearly $44 billion in security assistance that U.S. has committed to Ukraine since Moscow launched its invasion in 2022. Biden hopes to break the logjam by hitching it to funding for Israel, Taiwan, and the troubled southern border with Mexico, recasting the trio of issues as parts of the same overriding task of ensuring U.S. security. The U.S. President exhorted the Congress to approve urgent military support for Israel and Ukraine, saying that the aid would boost U.S. security for generations. He said while in Tel Aviv that he would ask Congress for an unprecedented package for Israel's defense this week. As per reports, the package will include $10 billion in emergency assistance for Israel and $60 billion for Ukraine. The U.S. President spoke to Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky hours before the speech. Biden has also been striking a statesmanlike tone on the Israel-Hamas war with an eye on voters, where there is strong support for Israel even if left-wing Democrats oppose his stance. Now, in Tel Aviv on Wednesday, the U.S. president backed Israel as it gears up for a ground invasion of Gaza after Hamas attacks killed more than 1,400 people. But he also brokered a deal to get some aid through Egypt into the Gaza Strip. The threat of a wider West Asian conflict, meanwhile, looms in the background. U.S. has already moved 2 aircraft carriers into the eastern Mediterranean to deter Iran or Lebanon's Hezbollah, both allies of Hamas, from getting involved. Now, for the latest on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani sends us this report from New York. Take a look.
President Biden, in his address from the Oval Office, the second since becoming president, made a direct appeal to the American people, saying supporting Ukraine and Israel now will help America for generations to come. He made this speech just one day before he's expected to make an urgent request to Congress for north of $100 billion, not only for aid to Israel and Ukraine, but also Taiwan and money for the U.S.-Mexico border. During his speech, time and again, the president compared Hamas and Vladimir Putin's Russia with one another, saying while they do pose different threats, they have one thing in common. They want to annihilate a neighboring democracy. The president said that supporting Ukraine and Israel is a matter of national security. The question is whether he was able to articulate that to the American people effectively. During his speech, the president, who's clearly concerned about hate here in America, said that Jewish families and Muslims should not feel hate and discrimination against them. As the president was delivering his speech, it was reported that U.S. forces were attacked in Iraq. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World.
It has been 2 weeks since the Israel-Hamas war broke out, and no endgame is in sight as humans continue to suffer. Till now, more than 1,400 Israelis have been killed, and over 3,700 Palestinians have lost their lives so far. The question still remains over who attacked the hospital in Gaza that allegedly killed hundreds. The question also remains over whether Gazans will be able to receive much-needed aid. And it is yet to be seen how a possible Israeli ground offensive into Gaza will turn out. In the latest, Israeli tanks are moving closer to the border between Israel and Gaza. This after Israeli Defense Minister told troops that they would soon see the Palestinian enclave from inside. Now, this indicates that an expected ground invasion with the aim of annihilating Hamas could be nearing. And as Israel prepares for a counter-offensive, our correspondent Jody Cohen, meanwhile, spoke with Yair Lapid, the leader of opposition in Israel. She asked him whether he considers joining the emergency war government that has been formed amidst the war, to which he answered no. However, he said that at such times, his party is working with the government in various other ways.
This is Jodie Cohen from WION. I wanted to ask, this is a time of war, this is a time of emergency. We're seeing forces in the south of the country, in the north of the country, preparing to defend. Because it's a time of emergency, would you consider joining the emergency unity government as a message of unity to the people of Israel and also to Israel's enemies?
It has been over 2 weeks into the Hamas-Israel war, and amidst all the devastation, there are finally some positive developments. Hamas has released 2 American hostages, and there is hope that the much-needed aid can finally reach Gaza. But even as this happens, threat for an escalation continues. But first, let's tell you about the positives. Hamas has released 2 American hostages. It's a mother and daughter duo. The release has been secured through Qatar's mediation efforts, while the Israeli Defense Forces say it's the military pressure that led to this. The White House claims that the U.S. was quote-unquote very much involved in the release. President Joe Biden has spoken to the 2 released Americans. These 2 women were among over 200 hostages that are held captive by Hamas. Jewish and Israeli organizations have created a stark reminder of the hostages. An empty Shabbat table has been installed in the plaza outside the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, with a place setting for each confirmed missing person. Families of the hostages participated in the symbolic dinner as they await the return of their loved ones. U.S. President Joe Biden has said that he believes that aid would reach Gaza in the next 24 to 48 hours. This after a commitment from the Israelis and the President of Egypt as part of a diplomatic breakthrough regarding aid passing through the Rafah crossing. On the other hand, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited the crossing on Friday. He appealed for aid trucks to move into the besieged Gaza Strip. At the same time, new satellite images show trucks with humanitarian aid gathered on the Egyptian side of the Rafah crossing with Gaza. Speaking about the likely ground offensive, as per Israel's economy minister, the military has the green light to launch a ground invasion. The minister stressed that the primary goal of the ground operation is to eliminate Hamas off the map. However, the U.S. and its allies have been urging Israel to be strategic and clear about its goal on the ground invasion of Gaza. They have warned against a prolonged occupation and have stressed on avoiding civilian casualties. This was done as part of private discussions on with Western defense officials with their Israeli counterparts. Meanwhile, a Gaza hospital says it faces imminent threat of airstrike from Israeli army. The administration of Al-Quds hospital in Gaza says the Israeli army has contacted them demanding the immediate evacuation of the hospital in preparation for a nighttime airstrike. On the international front, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has called on Israel to stop its attacks on Gaza. Erdogan said that Israeli attacks amount to a genocide. He has also urged governments worldwide to work for humanitarian ceasefire in the region. Also, what we know at this hour, the Israeli army on Friday displayed a large cache of weapons and supplies obtained from Hamas militants amid the attack on October 7th. The weapons seized included Hamas's grenades, landmines, and rocket-propelled grenades. According to a major general of the Israeli army, the weapons on display only made up 10% of total seized. While he says Hamas fighters only managed to use 30% of their weapons during the attack against Israel.
Weapons. We found on battle zone. They brought with
And for more on this, we are now being joined live by Lester Munson, who is a senior fellow at the National Security Institute and a principal international at BGR Group, which is a leading government relations firm in Washington, D.C. Lester is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Lester, welcome to the show.
Pleased to be with you.
There is fear of a massacre as staff patients refuse Israeli order to evacuate Al-Quds hospital. Israeli forces are relentless in their efforts to fight Hamas, but Gazans or Palestinians are caught up in the war. In your view, is there a way this could be done differently by the outraged Israeli government?
Well, I think it's important to remember that there are ongoing attacks into Israel from Gaza right now. Hamas continues to fire rockets into civilian areas inside Israel, continues to target Israel's civilian population as it did so egregiously just 2 weeks ago. So I think it's important we remember that that Hamas continues to attack Israel. I think Israel is actually showing great restraint thus far in its actions. The hostage release earlier today, as you were talking about, is a positive sign, but is a very small one. There are up to 200 other hostages still being held, and from what I understand, there had been a discussion about releasing 50 hostages. That seems to have not worked, at least not yet. So I think, given all of these facts and the fact that Hamas continues to attack Israel, Israel is actually showing enormous restraint thus far.
Lester, Hamas releasing hostages, is this a good sign of days to come?
Well, it can be. Frankly, I think it needs to be a lot more hostages, and it needs to be done a lot more quickly. There is a time element here, and I don't think the Israelis will wait that much longer before they do what they need to do with Hamas. So this hostage situation, if Qatar is going to play a critical role here, they need to do it quickly. They need to move fast. These releases should be unconditional. Frankly, it's appalling that these folks are held hostage at all. So really something needs to happen quickly here, or I'm afraid it may provoke a quicker invasion from Israel than Hamas was suspecting.
Lester, there is another frontier that is proving to be a problem, and that is Lebanon. If Hezbollah or Iran, for that matter, decides to join the war in the guise of backing the Palestinian cause, what impact would that have on Israel and the West?
Well, obviously, a two-front war is much more difficult to fight than a one-front war. So if there is action in the north, Israel's defense forces will be stretched a little more thinly. I do think they're prepared for that. Israel, while it was taken unawares a couple of weeks ago by the terrorist attack from Hamas, it's whatever naivete it may have had is surely gone at this point. So I suspect Israel's very prepared for a Hezbollah incursion. And I think the purpose of President Biden visiting Israel, effectively warning Iran and Hezbollah not to attack Israel, the presence of a U.S. aircraft carrier group with another one coming off the coast of Israel is a very strong sign that an expansion of this war could lead to more direct U.S. involvement. We've already seen the U.S. Navy shoot down missiles from Yemen that were aimed at Israel from the Houthis in Yemen, who were evidently attacking Israel, presumably at the behest of Iran, which is their patron. So this war is complex. It may expand. I think the presence of U.S. forces there should have a mitigating factor for that expansion.
Lester, finally, and I want your brief response to this one. There's an emergency peace summit to be held in Egypt. Some say it's a farce because Egypt and Arab countries have refused to allow desperate Palestinians into their country. But in your view, is Israel likely to listen to these leaders that will be participating in the forum?
I think the reality is on the ground that Israel is very interested in talking to its neighbors. The neighboring countries, Egypt, Jordan, and others, are as concerned about Palestinian terrorism as Israel is. They're less likely to say it in public, of course. But the reality is, behind the scenes, is the Israeli government and these other governments, mostly Arab governments, are speaking to each other quite frequently. That is a good thing, and that can help limit how big this war becomes. And so I think that's to be encouraged, and good for you for pointing out that these Arab countries need to do more as well on the humanitarian front.
I've been talking to Lester Munson, who is a senior fellow at the National Security Institute and a principal international at BGR Group, which is a leading government relations firm in Washington, D.C. Lester, thank you very much for giving us time today and for talking to us on WION World is One.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Now, it's been over 2 weeks since the battle against the Hamas militants by Israel began. And in the latest, aid is now finally being delivered to Gaza through Rafah border crossing. We're getting you the live visuals as trucks carrying humanitarian aid are moving towards Gaza. In other positive development, Hamas has also released 2 American mother and daughter duo who were being held captive. The release has been secured through Qatar's mediation efforts, while the Israeli Defense Forces say it's the military pressure that led to this. The White House claims that the U.S. was quote-unquote very much involved in the release, and President Joe Biden has spoken to the 2 Americans who were released.
The army has green light.
Speaking about the likely ground offensive, as per Israel's economy minister, the military have the green light to launch a ground invasion. The minister stressed that the primary goal of the ground operation is to eliminate Hamas off the map. However, the US and its allies have been urging Israel to be strategic and clear about its goals on the ground invasion of Gaza. They have warned against a prolonged occupation and have stressed on avoiding civilian casualties. Now, this was done as part of private discussions of Western defense officials with their Israeli counterparts. Israel Defense Forces warplanes continue to attack many Hamas targets throughout the Gaza Strip overnight. Among the targets attacked, operational headquarters, anti-tank launchers, as well as other infrastructures of the Hamas group that were used by it for terrorist purposes. Now, in addition, the IDF attacked observation, anti-aircraft and sniping positions of Hamas located inside high-rise buildings. Meanwhile, a Gaza hospital says it faces imminent